The Best Christmas Pageant, Chapter 4. Well, the first pageant rehearsal was usually about as much fun as a 3-hour ride on a school bus and just as noisy and crowded. This rehearsal, though, was different. Everybody shut up and settled down right away for fear of missing something awful that the Herdmans might do. They got there 10 minutes late, sliding into the room like a bunch of outlaws about to shoot up a saloon. When Leroy passed Charlie, he knuckled him behind the ear, and one little primary girl yelled as Gladys went by, but Mother had said she was going to ignore everything except blood. And since the primary kid wasn't bleeding and neither was Charlie, nothing happened. Mother said, "And here's the Herdman family. We're glad to see you all," which was probably the biggest lie she ever said right out loud in church. Imogene smiled, the Herdman smile we called it, sly and sneaky. And there they sat, the closest thing to criminals that we knew about. And they were going to represent the best and most beautiful. No wonder everybody was so worked up. Mother started to separate everybody into angels and shepherds and guests in the inn, but right away she ran into trouble. Who were the shepherds? Leroy Herdman wanted to know. Where'd they come from? Ollie Herdman didn't even know what a shepherd was, or anyway, that's what he said. What was the inn? Claude asked. What's in the inn? It's like a motel, somebody told him, where people go to spend the night. What people? Claude said. Jesus? Oh, honestly, Alice Wendleton grumbled. Jesus wasn't even born yet. Mary and Joseph went there. Why? Ralph asked. What happened first? Imogene hollered at my mother. Begin at the beginning. That really scared me, because the beginning would be the book of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning, and if we were going to have to start with the book of Genesis, we'd never get through. The thing was, the Herdmans didn't know anything about the Christmas story. They knew that Christmas was Jesus' birthday, but everything else was news to them. The shepherds, the wise men, the star, the stable, the crowded inn. It was hard to believe, at least it was hard for me to believe. Alice Wendleton said she didn't have any trouble believing it. How would they find out about the Christmas story, she said. They don't even know what the Bible is. Look what Gladys did to the Bible last week. While Imogene was snitching money from the collection plate in my class, Gladys and Ollie drew mustaches and tails on all the disciples in the primary grade illustrated Bible. They never went to church in their whole life till your little brother told them we got refreshments, Alice said, and all you ever hear about Christmas in school is how to make ornaments out of aluminum foil, so how would they know about the Christmas story? She was right. Of course, they might have read about it, but they never read anything except Amazing Comics, and they might have heard about it on TV, except that Ralph paid 65 cents for their TV at a garage sale, and you couldn't see anything on it unless somebody held an antenna on it. Even then, you couldn't see much. The only other way for them to hear about the Christmas story was from their parents, and I guess Mr. Herdman never got around to it before he climbed on the railway train to run away, and it was pretty clear that Mrs. Herdman had given up ever trying to tell them about anything. So they just didn't know. And Mother said she had better begin by reading the Christmas story from the Bible, and this was a pain in the neck to most of us because we knew the whole thing backward and forward and never had to be told anything except who we were supposed to be and where we were supposed to stand. Joseph and Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. Pregnant, yelled Ralph Herdman. Well, that stirred things up. All the big kids began to giggle, and all the little kids wanted to know what was so funny, and Mother had to hammer on the floor with a blackboard pointer. That's enough, Ralph, she went on with the story. I don't think it's very nice to say that Mary was pregnant, Alice whispered to me. But she was, I pointed out. In a way, though, I agreed with her. It sounded too ordinary. Anybody could be pregnant. Great with child sounded better for Mary. I'm not supposed to talk about people being pregnant. Alice folded her hands on her lap and pinched her lips together. I'd better tell my mother. Tell her what? Tell that your mother is talking about things like that in church. My mother might not want me to be here. I was pretty sure she would do that. She wanted to be Mary, and she was mad at Mother, and I knew, too, that she would make it sound worse than it was, and Mrs. Wendleton would get madder than she already was, and Mrs. Wendleton didn't even want cats to have kittens or birds to lay eggs, and she wouldn't let Alice play with anybody who had 2 rabbits. But there wasn't much I could do about it except pinch Alice, which I did. She yelped, and Mother separated us and made me sit beside Imogene Herdman and sent Alice to the middle of the baby angels. I wasn't crazy to sit next to Imogene after all. I'd spent my whole life staying away from Imogene, but she didn't even notice me. Not much, anyway. Shut up, was all she said. I want to hear her. I couldn't believe it. Among other things, the Herdmans were famous for never sitting still and never paying attention to anyone, teachers, parents, their own, or anybody else's. The truant officers, the police, yet here they were, eyes glued to my mother and taking in every word. What's that? They would yell whenever they didn't understand the language, and when Mother read about there being no room in the inn, Imogene's jaw dropped and she sat up in her seat. Oh my gosh, they didn't even have room for Jesus? I saw Alice purse her lips together, so I knew that it was something else Mrs. Wendelkin would hear about swearing in the church. Well, now, after all, Mother explained, nobody knew the baby was going to turn out to be Jesus. You said Mary knew, Ralph said. Why didn't she tell them? I would have told them, Imogene put in. Boy, would I have told them. What's the matter with Joseph that he didn't tell them? Her pregnant and everything, she grumbled. What was that they laid the baby in, Leroy said. The manger? Is that like a bed? Why would they have a bed in the barn? That's just the point, Mother said. They didn't have a bed in the barn. So Mary and Joseph had to use whatever there was. Well, would you put a baby in if you had a new baby and no bed to put the baby in? We put Gladys in a drawer, Imogene volunteered. Well, there you are, Mother said, blinking a little. You didn't have a bed for Gladys, so you had to use something else. Oh, we had a bed, Ralph said, only Ollie was still in it and he wouldn't get out. And he didn't like Alice. He elbowed Ollie. Remember how he didn't like Gladys? I don't know why I just said that. Remember how you didn't like Gladys? He said to Ollie. I thought that was pretty smart of Ollie not to like Gladys right off the bat. Anyway, Mother said, Mary and Joseph used the manger. The manger is a large wooden feeding trough for animals. What were the wadded up clothes? Claude wanted to know. The what? Mother said. You read about it. She wrapped them in wadded up clothes. Swaddling clothes, Mother said. Long ago, people used to wrap their babies very tightly in big pieces of material so they wouldn't move around. It made the babies feel cozy and comfortable. I thought it probably just made the babies mad. Till then, I didn't know what swaddling clothes were either, and they sounded terrible, so I wasn't too surprised when Imogene got all excited about that. You mean they tied him up and put him in a feed box, she said. Where was the child welfare? The child welfare was always checking up on the Herdmans. I bet if the child welfare had ever found Gladys all tied up in a bureau drawer, they would have done something about it. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, Mother went on, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and Shazam! Gladys yelled, flinging her arms out and smacking the kid next to her. What? Mother said. Mother had never read Amazing Comics. Out of the black night, with horrible vengeance, the mighty marvel... I don't know what you're talking about, Gladys, Mother said. This is the angel of the Lord who comes to the shepherds in the fields and... Out of nowhere, right? Gladys said. In the black night, right? Well, Mother said unhappily, in a way. So Gladys sat back down looking very satisfied, as if this was at least one part of the Christmas story that made sense to her. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Mother went on reading, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, That's you, Leroy, Ralph said, and Claude and Ollie, so pay attention. What does it mean, wise men? Ollie wanted to know. Were they like school teachers? No, dumbbell, Claude said. It means like President of the United States. Mother looked a little surprised and a little pleased, like she did when Charlie finally learned the times tables to 5. Well, that's very close, Claude. Actually, they were kings. Well, it's about time, Imogene muttered. Maybe they'll tell the innkeeper where to get off and get the baby out of the barn. They saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him and presented him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What's that stuff? Leroy wanted to know. Precious oils, Mother said, and fragrant resins. Oil? Imogene hollered. What kind of a cheap king hands out oil for a present? You get better presents from the firemen. Sometimes the Herdmans got Christmas presents at the firemen's party, but the Santa Claus always had to feel around the packages to make sure they weren't getting bows and arrows or dart guns or anything like that. Imogene usually got sewing cards or jigsaw puzzles, and she never liked them, but I guess she figured they were better than oil. Then we came to King Herod, and the Herdmans never heard of him either, so Mother had to explain that it was Herod who sent the wise men to feed the baby Jesus. Was it him that sent the crummy presents? Ollie wanted to know. And Mother said it was worse than that. He planned to have the baby Jesus put to death. Oh my gosh, Imogene said. He just got bored and already they're out to kill him? The Herdmans wanted to know all about King Herod and what he looked like and how rich he was and whether he fought wars with people. He must have been the main king, Claude said, if he could make the other 3 do what he wanted them to. If I was king, Leroy said, I wouldn't let some other king push me around. You couldn't help it that if he was the main king, I'd go be king somewhere else. They were really interested in Herod, and I figured they liked him. He was so mean. They could have been his ancestor. Maybe his name was Herod Herdman, but I was wrong. Who's going to be Herod in this play? Leroy said. We don't have Herod in our pageant, Mother said, and they all got mad. They wanted somebody to be Herod so they could beat up on him. I couldn't understand the Herdmans. You would have thought the Christmas story came right out of the FBI files. They got so involved in it. They wanted a bloody end to Herod, worried about Mary having her baby in a barn, and they called the wise men a bunch of dirty spies. And they left the first rehearsal arguing about whether Joseph should have sent fire to the inn or just chased the innkeeper into the next county. When we got home, my father wanted to hear all about it. Well, Mother said, just suppose you had never heard the Christmas story and you didn't know anything about it, and then somebody told you. What would you think? My father looked at her for a minute or two and then said, well, I guess I would think it was pretty disgraceful that they couldn't find any room for a pregnant woman except in the stable. I was amazed. It didn't seem natural for my father to be on the same side as the Herdmans, but then it didn't seem natural for the Herdmans to be on the right side of a thing. It would have made more sense for them to be on Herod's side. Exactly, Mother said. It was perfectly disgraceful, and I never thought about it much. You hear all about the nice warm stable with all the animals breathing and the sweet-smelling hay, but that doesn't change the fact that they put Mary in a barn. Now let me tell you. And she told my father all about the rehearsal, and when she was through, she said, it's clear to me that deep down those children have some good instincts after all. My father said he couldn't exactly agree. According to you, he said their chief instinct was to burn Herod alive. No, their chief instinct was to get Mary and the baby out of the barn, but even so, it was Herod they wanted to do away with, and not Mary or Joseph. They picked out the right villain. That must mean something. Maybe so. My father looked up from his newspaper. Is that what finally happened to Herod? What did happen to Herod anyway? None of us knew. I had never thought much about Herod. It was just a name, somebody in the Bible, Herod the king. But the Herdmans went and looked him up. And the very next day, Imogene grabbed me out of recess. How do you get a book out of the library? You have to get a card. How do you get a card? You have to sign your name. She looked at me for a minute with her eyes all scrunched up. Do you have to sign your own name? I thought Imogene probably wanted to get one of those dirty books out of the basement, which is where they keep them, but I knew nobody would let her do that. And there's this big chain across the stairs to the basement, and Mrs. Grebner, the librarian, can hear it rattle, so no matter where she is in the library, you don't stand a chance of getting down there. Of course you have to sign your own name, I said. They have to know who has the books. I didn't see what difference it made, whether she signed the card with her own name or signed the card Queen Elizabeth. Mrs. Grabner still wasn't going to let Imogene Herdman take any books out of the public library. I guess she couldn't stop them from using the library, though, because that's where they found out about Herod. They went in that afternoon, all 6 of them, and told Mrs. Grabner they wanted library cards, and usually when anybody tells Mrs. Grabner they want a library card, they get this big, happy smile on her face, and she says, good, we want all the boys and girls to have library cards. She didn't say that to the Herdmans, though. She just asked them why they wanted library cards. We want to read about Jesus, Imogene said. Not Jesus, Ralph said, that king who was out there to get Jesus, Herod. Later on, Miss Grabner told my mother that she had been a librarian for 38 years and loved every minute of it because every day brought something new and different. But now, she said, I might as well retire. When Imogene Herdman came in and said she wanted to read about Jesus, I knew I'd heard everything there was to hear. At the next rehearsal, Mother started again to separate everyone into angels and shepherds and guests at the end, but she didn't get very far. The Herdmans wanted to rewrite the whole pageant and hang Herod for a finish. They couldn't stand it that he died in bed of old age. It wasn't just Jesus he was after, Ralph told us. He killed all kinds of people. He even killed his own wife, Leroy said. And nothing happened to him, Imogene grumbled. Well, he died, didn't he? Someone said. Maybe he died a horrible death. What'd he die of? Ralph shrugged. It didn't say. Flu, I guess. They were so mad about it that I thought they might quit the pageant, but they didn't. Not then, or ever. And all the people who kept hoping that the Herdmans would get bored and leave, they were out of luck. They showed up at rehearsals right on time and did just what they were supposed to. But they were still the Herdmans, and there was at least one person who didn't forget that for a minute. One day I saw Alice Wendelkin writing something down on a little pad of paper and trying to hide it with the other hand. It's none of your business, she said. Well, it wasn't any of my business, but it wasn't any of Alice's either, and what she wrote was, Gladys Herdman drinks communion wine. It isn't wine, I said, it's grape juice. I don't care what it is, she drinks it. I've seen her 3 times with her mouth all purple. They steal crayons from the Sunday school cupboards, too, and if you shake the happy birthday bank in the kindergarten room, it doesn't make a sound. They stole all the pennies out of it. I was amazed at Alice. I would have never thought to go and shake the happy birthday bank. And every time you go in the girls' room, she went on, the whole air is blue, and Imogene Herdman is sitting there in her Mary costume smoking cigars. Alice wrote all these things down and how many times each thing happened. I don't know why, unless it made her feel good to see it in black and white, but she wanted to just show how awful they were. Since none of the Herdmans had ever gone to church or Sunday school or read the Bible or anything, they didn't know how things were supposed to be. Imogene, for instance, didn't know that Mary was supposed to be acting in a certain way, sort of quiet and dreamy and out of this world. The way Imogene did it, Mary was a lot like Mrs. Centauro at the pizza parlor. Mrs. Centaro's a big fat lady with a little skinny husband and 9 children, and she yells and hollers and hugs her kids and slaps them around, and that's how Imogene's Mary was, loud and bossy. Get away from the baby, she yelled at Ralph, who was Joseph, and she made the wise men keep their distance. The wise men wanted to honor the Christ child, Mother said, for the 10th time. They don't mean to harm him, for heaven's sakes. But the wise men didn't know how things were supposed to be either, and nobody blamed Imogene for shoving them out of the way. You got the feeling that these wise men were going to hustle back to Herod as fast as they could and squeal on the baby out of pure meanness. They thought about it, too. What if we didn't go home another way, Leroy said. Leroy was Malchoir. What if we went back to the king and told on the baby where he was and all? He would murder Jesus, Ralph said. Old Herod would murder him. He would not. That was Imogene with fire in her eye, and since herdmen fought one another just as fast as they fought anybody else, Mother had to step in and settle everyone down. I thought about it later, though, and I decided that if Herod, a king, set out to murder Jesus, a carpenter's baby son, he would surely find some way to do it. So when Leroy said, what if we went back and told on the baby? It gave you something to think about. There'd be no Jesus ever. I don't know whether anybody else got this flash. Alice Wendelkin, for one, did not. I don't think it's very nice to talk about the baby Jesus being murdered, she said, stitching her lips together and looking sour. That was one more thing to write down on her pad of paper, and one more thing to tell her mother about the herdmans, besides the fact that they swore and smoked and stole and all that. I think she just kept hoping that they would do one great big sinful thing and that my mom would say, that's that, and get on the telephone and have them thrown out. Be sure and tell your mother that I can step right in and be Mary if I have to, she said, as we stood in the back row of the angel choir. And if I'm Mary, we can get the Perkins baby for Jesus, but Mrs. Perkins won't let Imogene Herdman get her hands on him. The Perkins baby would have made a terrific Jesus, and Alice knew it. The way things stood, we didn't have any baby at all, and this really bothered my mother because you couldn't very well have the best Christmas pageant in history with the chief character missing. We had lots of babies offered in the beginning, all the way from Eugene Sloper, who was so new he was still red, up to Junior Caudle, who was almost 4. His mother said he could scrunch up. But when all the mothers found out about the Herdmans being in there, they withdrew their babies. Mother had called everybody she knew trying to scratch up a baby, but the closest she came was Bernice Watrous, who kept foster babies all the time. I have a darling boy right now, a little boy, said Bernice. He's 3 months old and so good I hardly know he's in the house. He'd be wonderful. Of course, he's Chinese. Does that matter? No, said Mother, that doesn't matter at all. But Bernice's baby got adopted 2 weeks before Christmas, and Bernice said she didn't like to ask to borrow him back right away. So that was that. Listen, Imogene said, I'll get us a baby. How would you do that? Mother said. I'll steal one, Imogene said. There's always 2 or 3 babies in a carriage outside the A&P supermarket. Oh, Imogene, don't be ridiculous, Mother said. You can't just walk off with somebody's baby, you know. I doubt if Imogene did know that. She walked off with everything else. We just won't worry about a baby. We'll use a baby doll, said Mother. That'll be better anyway. Imogene looked pleased. A doll can't bite you, she pointed out, which just went to prove that the Herdmans started out mean right from the cradle.